Welcome to Residence Messenger on Taipei Broadcasting Station. I'm your host, Ross Darrell Feingold. Today, our special guest is Dana Tur, a travel writer extraordinaire, well known not just here in Taiwan, but throughout the Asia region for writing wonderful stories about where to visit and what to see, what to eat. But Dana is also a third culture kid, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So, Dana, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ross. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming. Before we talk about travel and your career as a travel writer, tell us a bit about being a third culture kid. First of all, what does that even mean?
Well, it's actually a really old term that was coined in the 50s by this sociologist, and it's used to describe the children of expatriates. And the term third culture refers to, so the first culture is like your parents' culture, like where they're from. Second culture is the culture of the host country or the country that you're living in. And then the third culture is like a mix of both.
So if you come from, say, the United States and you live in Taipei for 3 years and you go back to the United States, does that make you a third culture kid?
Yes, I think the term is really broad.
Yeah. So if you're you have one parent who's Taiwanese and one who's American, you're also a third culture kid?
Well, some think they are, some don't.
Oh, we won't talk about that.
Yeah.
Those ones who are falsely claiming to be third culture kids. But your story is a little bit more interesting than that. Because look, when we meet a lot of people here in Taipei who kind of fall into those descriptions I just met. So maybe one of their parents is from Taiwan, one parent is from somewhere else, or we meet people who are here maybe briefly, especially if their parents are assigned to Taiwan to work. So we might meet someone who spent 3 years here as a child, or we might meet someone who grew up here even though they're not originally from here. But your situation is a little more unique. Tell us about it.
Yes, it is. So I actually grew up in 5 countries. So I was born in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, and both of my parents are Malaysian, and we only lived there for a year. And when I was 1 year old, my dad got a job offer in Hong Kong, so we left for Hong Kong. And the plan was to stay there, to live there for only 3 years. But then my dad got posted to Jakarta, and then to Singapore, and then to Taipei. And
after you grew up, since you're now a big girl, Dana, but
yes.
Your parents transferred to additional locations as well.
Yes. Then they moved to Bangkok and Seoul.
So before I even ask you, if some people ask your parents, because they spent most of your father's professional career living in different cities and countries, where do they consider home? Or maybe they're the third culture kid, not you.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's interesting because even though for me, I don't really consider any country to be home, my parents still feel that Malaysia is home because they've lived there till they were 30, basically. Yeah, so they still feel...
They still have a strong sense of identity with Malaysia.
I would say so.
Is that because the food is good?
Yes.
is that the main reason?
It's one of the reasons.
You just said you don't really feel strongly that one particular country is your home or maybe your nationality. And that's understandable because you've traveled and you've lived in so many different places, often only for a limited amount of time, 2 or 3 years before you transferred again. But do people criticize you when you say that? Does somebody say like, "Oh, why aren't you patriotic to?" And then they fill in a place where they think you should be patriotic to.
That's a good question, actually. I feel like it's mostly older people who kind of want me to strongly identify to a certain country. The younger people or people my age don't really care because I feel that that they can also sort of relate to this, having traveled a lot.
Yeah, even when you were in university, a lot of students in university, they sort of get very militant about certain issues? Nobody said to you like, "Oh, how come you don't identify with those student groups, right?" People start to get really heated about these kinds of issues.
Well, generally, I would try to stay away from people like that, and even if they do feel that I should like identify strongly with a certain group or something, after getting to know me, then they're like, oh, okay, I understand where she's coming from. Like that's a new way of looking at things.
You mentioned your folks have lived in so many places for work purposes, basically throughout your lifetime. Did you ever say to your dad, "Hey, Dad, well, why don't you take a job in London, or Paris, or Barcelona, somewhere nice outside of Asia for a while"?
Yes. I used to wonder why my dad never got a job posting in somewhere that was outside of Asia. He did. He was offered a job in New Zealand once, but my mom showed me pictures of the school that I would be attending if we were to move there, and I saw the school uniforms that the students had to wear, and they were so hideous. I was like, oh no,
so your dad. So the truth about your dad's job posting is it was largely based on which location you liked the school uniforms.
No, just that one instance.
How old were you the first time you came to Taiwan? The first time your dad was posted to Taipei for work?
I was 11.
And where were you coming from?
We were moving from Singapore.
And did you know anything about Taiwan when your parents said, "Dana, we have some news for you. We're going to relocate to Taipei"?
No, I knew nothing about Taiwan. Like, my only knowledge of Taiwan before I was 11 years old was that a lot of my products said made in Taiwan. And my mom had a friend who lived in Taiwan before, and she talked about how there were a lot of earthquakes, and basically that's all I knew about Taiwan.
Oh, were you sad to leave Singapore?
Yeah.
Were you happy there when you were 11?
Yes, I was really sad to leave Singapore because we had just lived there for a year. We had just moved from Jakarta, and we stayed in Jakarta for 4 years and Singapore for a year, and it took me a long time to get over like leaving all of my friends and my life in Jakarta and having to like build this whole new life in Singapore.
I could imagine, for a 10 or 11-year-old, you got to build a new life. It's,
your social
engagements.
Yeah, like birthday parties and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly birthday parties.
What was your first impression of Taipei as an 11-year-old who had already lived in Hong Kong, Jakarta, and Singapore?
Taipei was like no other city that I've ever seen before. So we first landed in the old Chiang Kai-shek airport in January 2000, and it was just like a really, really cold winter that year. And we got into a taxi, and I looked out, and I was like, oh, it's so ugly. I just saw a lot of concrete and like tall, ugly buildings, and the sky was gray, and yeah. Mm-hmm. I was pretty miserable.
A lot of people who move here, of course, often we deal with adults, not 11-year-olds. Right. But for a lot of the people who move here, they'll find something pretty quickly that they like about Taipei or Taiwan, whether it's some people do like the hot weather in the summer, or some people like hiking or cycling, and a lot of people, of course, like the food. Some people like cafes in Taipei or the museums or the nightlife. Now, I know as an 11-year-old you didn't go into the nightlife. What was something as a child though that finally made you feel comfortable about living in Taipei as a foreigner?
Well, for me it was school. I went to the American school, and at first I didn't speak like any Chinese at all beyond like ni hao and xie xie, but my classmates were really friendly, and after I learned how to speak more Chinese, then things started to get better for me, since I could understand my surroundings and I could like read menus and street signs.
And then you went to the U.S. for university. Why didn't you just stay in Asia, since you had been in so many places in Asia already?
Well, I attended international schools my entire life. So growing up, most of my classmates were American. So I never really considered studying here in Asia.
Now, but for somebody who had spent so much time in Asia and then going to the U.S. to study for university, even though you went to an American school, was there something about American culture, or when you also studied for a master's in London, something about British culture that you were surprised? You didn't realize that there are aspects of American culture that even you as a third culture kid, you were just kind of lost?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a really interesting question because, as you can tell, Ross, I have an American accent. So when I was studying in New York, people would just assume that I was American and that I had grown up there.
Well, you don't sound like a New Yorker, though. So what part of the U.S. did they think you came from?
I don't know, just like a standard American accent. But I feel like my American accent has fizzled out a bit. But I've been told that I used to have like a Valley Girl accent.
It's like California.
Yeah, but I don't anymore. I hope not.
Mm.
Yeah, so after people started to get to know me and talk to me, I think they like something clicked in them. They started to realize I wasn't American because, for instance, I didn't understand a lot of the idioms and the slang that they use.
Things like, Americans like to use sports-related idioms,
Yes.
For example,
Mm-hmm.
baseball or American football-related idioms. That's pretty common in American English.
Yes, like out of left field.
So when somebody said out of left field, you had no idea what they were talking about.
Yeah, I was just like, how, what?
Well, that's an interesting point. Schools maybe should have a whole class on American sports idioms. Now you could teach it.
Oh, well, it's been a while, but yeah.
But after you finished your American and your UK sojourn, you
Mm-hmm.
quickly came back to Asia. What was the inspiration to return to Asia to begin your professional career?
I wanted to be closer to my family. My parents and my grandma were living at Seoul at that time. And so I applied for jobs in different cities in Asia.
Mm-hmm. So you didn't think about bringing your third culture perspective to working in America or UK?
No, I mean well, I did also apply for jobs in New York, but there weren't. But it was really competitive, especially with journalism, and there were just more opportunities for me to become a journalist here in Asia since there are jobs for people who write in English, and it's a bit difficult to find fluent English speakers in countries in Asia like Taiwan or Korea or Thailand.
Which is probably why you got hired by the Taipei Times, one of the English language publications here in Taipei. What were your beats? What were you writing about at the Taipei Times?
So I work for the features section, so that's like the fun section of the newspaper. Right?
Not all that political stuff.
No. So so no politics, no news. I wrote a weekly column about art exhibitions, and I also had a column about craft beer for the food and drink section.
Tell us some more about that, because it sounds like a dream job, getting paid to write about craft beer.
Yeah, it was really fun because I got to sample a lot of the beer as well. Mm-hmm. So how it came about was that a friend and I went to check out the opening of this new craft beer bar in Taipei back in 2015. And before that, I wasn't really fond of beer because my experience with drinking beer, throughout college and grad school, was just you go to a pub and you order a huge pint and it just tastes nasty and watery. But when I had craft beer, it actually tasted good, and I didn't realize that beer could taste good.
Mm. And then you pitched your supervisors on writing a column about this.
Mm-hmm.
And that just happened to coincide with the growth of the craft beer industry here in Taipei as well.
Yes, that's correct. Back in 2015, a bunch of craft breweries were opening in Taipei all around the same time, so it was a very timely topic to cover.
And what do you tell people who ask you, what should I look for in a craft beer? I don't know anything about it. I want to sample it. You're the expert. Dana used to write a column about it. What do you give people as the quick and easy answer for what to do about finding good craft beer in Taipei?
Well, in my opinion, I believe that if a craft brewery does an IPA or a pale ale well, that means that their other flavors are usually pretty good, because IPA and pale ale are like the two standard craft beers, and they're really hard to mess up. So, yeah.
Because usually the menus here in Taipei, they have all those fruity and kind of other interesting varieties of craft beers.
Yeah, those are a little tricky. They're either really good or a bit weird tasting.
What else did you write about? What are some of the other memorable things you wrote about besides craft beer when you were working for the Taipei Times?
Oh, I wrote so many stories. I covered the sunflower movement back in 2014. Yes, I've also interviewed cat breeders, which was how I found out I was allergic to cats.
Well, I hope you got some extra compensation from Taipei Times for that.
I won't say anything, but yeah. Yes. Yes, I've also interviewed activists, like these two women who make YouTube videos about what it's like being a plus-size woman in Taiwan. Yeah, that was...
What kind of challenges did you face in covering all these things? Because look, people think it must be so easy. You just go and ask a brewer about their craft beers, or you go ask an artist about their artwork, things like that. What are some of the challenges about writing these kinds of feature stories here in Taipei?
Well, when I first moved back, I hadn't spoken Chinese in 7 years. So the language issue, that was a bit challenging at first, because even though I'm writing in English, I had to do a lot of research and write emails and interview people in Chinese. So that was a little terrifying, but after a while, it came more naturally.
And after the Taipei Times, you began to write about travel and destinations, and you started writing for various airline in-flight magazines as well. How did you get into that?
Well, after a few years at the Taipei Times, a couple of in-flight magazines and travel magazines started contacting me.
So the people who write these articles for the in-flight magazines, they're actually real people.
Yes, they're real people.
Because you look at those articles, you're sitting, before COVID, you used to sit on the airplane and you read these articles, and they're so happy about, visiting a restaurant or a museum in some interesting city around the world. It almost seems like these things are just generated by the happy story machine and not a real person.
No, they're written by real people. They're not written in some content farmed by robots.
And who picks the topics for these nice articles in the in-flight magazines?
It's a bit of a mix. Sometimes the editor will contact the writer, and sometimes we can just pitch to them. So how it happens is that, for instance, an airline wants to promote a certain destination, or they want to boost sales to a certain destination, so they would convey this to the editor, and then the editor will reach out to the writers and ask them to pitch a story about that particular destination. So for instance, let's say Paris, the editor will ask us to pitch stories about Paris for for instance, something about perfumeries or chocolate or wine, and then we just take it from there.
Yeah, on the airplane, everybody nowadays is either watching a movie or some other video because you have a screen in the seat back in front of you, where people have their tablets. There might even be some people who still bring a book on an airplane. How do you know that passengers actually read these in-flight magazine stories?
Well, back when I used to sit on planes, and I used to fly really often, because I can never sleep well on a plane, so I would just look around and see what other people are doing, and you would be surprised to know that people actually do read magazines, especially on really long flights, because you can't just stare at your screen the entire time, so they would alternate between flipping through a magazine or staring at their screen or reading a book.
Now, have you ever seen the person sitting next to you on the plane reading an article in the in-flight magazine that you wrote?
I think I have a couple of times.
Did you hit them and say like, "Hey, I wrote that"?
No, I felt like doing that, but then I thought that might be a bit creepy.
Yeah, how would you prove it's you anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly. Show them my passport.
Or when you were walking around the plane, like when you went to the restrooms, you see like people thumbing through the in-flight magazine and maybe looking at your article.
Probably. I can't remember in that great of detail.
And what's the future, though, of the in-flight magazine industry because of the COVID-19 and obviously 2020 and now into 2021? This huge reduction in air travel. Are those still going to exist in the future when we do resume normal travel? Will the in-flight magazine still exist?
That's a really tough question, and I've actually been asking my editors this question as well, and they don't really have a clear answer now. So we're trying to shift to mostly online magazines these days, but that's still a steep learning curve for both of us.
How's it different?
Because of COVID, the type of travel articles that we write, they can't really be about like far-flung destinations or even like destination specific. So for instance, I've been writing a lot more articles about staycations or like trips that we wish we could embark in soon, like more like dream-worthy kind of narrative.
Well, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, maybe Dana will tell us a bit about the dream vacation that she would recommend. You're listening to Residence Messenger on Taipei Broadcasting Station. Welcome back to Residence Messenger on Taipei Broadcasting Station. Our guest today is travel writer Dana Tur. Dana, before the break, you mentioned that you're doing more writing about staycations and dream vacations. One of the publications you write for is the English language magazine of the Tourism Bureau from the Taiwan government. What's the staycation to go on in Taipei that you would recommend to people?
Staycations for people who live in Taipei. Well, Yilan has become a more popular staycation destination because of all the outdoorsy, naturey things there are to do there, like beaches, mountains, waterfalls.
So you could do that on a weekend, and maybe it'd be like a getaway, the way we think of like a weekend getaway in other countries.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, good food too?
Yeah. Yes, if you look hard enough.
You look hard enough. And what about the dream vacation? What's an example of a dream vacation that you've written about recently?
Oh, that I've written about, not something that I'm dreaming of taking.
Hopefully they're the same, Dana.
Yeah, some of them are. Well, recently I wrote an article for Marriott about dream vacations that we wish we could take around Asia, and it was just very over the top, like going to Macau and to spend money on casinos or renting a yacht in Hong Kong. That kind of stuff.
And did you get any feedback on those? People said like, "Oh, that's my dream too."
No, but maybe it is. I don't know.
Tell us a little bit about some of the city guides that you author as well. You do one for Louis Vuitton, and you do one for CNBC. Tell us about the Louis Vuitton Guide to Taipei.
Oh, okay. So I'm writing a guidebook to Taipei for Louis Vuitton City Guide, and it doesn't only cover high-end stuff as people normally assume, but it's...
Well, yeah, because LV is kind of high-end, right?
Yes, but actually it's a very comprehensive guide. There are 8 chapters, including restaurants, hotels, nightlife, and there are also other chapters that are more quirky and observational. So, for instance, I'll give tips on how to cross the street here in Taipei and how to use the 7-Eleven, and also just like thoughts on how people dress and all these cultural nuances. So
LV's customer base, the people who might buy the LV guide, they do actually go to 7-Elevens as well.
Maybe if they really have to, like late at night or something.
What are some of the types of places that you write about? If it's restaurants or museums or other interesting things to see. I mean, surely you don't just write about good old 101. So, what are the types of places? I mean, you can mention names if you want, but just generally speaking, what gets into the LV guide?
Oh yeah, so as you mentioned, we do cover like the typical tourist attractions like Taipei Memorial Hall or 101. But what I like about writing this guide is that I get quite a lot of leeway, so I can decide what to write about, and my editors actually prefer that I write about more like offbeat. Like hidden gems, those kinds of places. So, for instance, for nightlife, there are a lot of bars that I personally think are great, but that haven't got a lot of press coverage. Like Ginspiration in Dadaocheng, they do a lot of good gin cocktails. Yes, and restaurants. There's a restaurant that I like. It's called NKU. It stands for Nordic Keep Unique, and the food is it's a mixture of Taiwanese ingredients and Nordic style cooking. It's a really nice fine dining restaurant that no one really talks about that much.
When will the guide be published?
It's supposed to be published later this year.
And is it only available in the Louis Vuitton store? Where do people buy the Louis Vuitton guide?
It's only available in Louis Vuitton stores.
Not even online? You actually have to go to the store and buy
it? No, you can also order online.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's a global guide, though. It's not just Taipei, correct? There's other cities as well?
Yes, correct. There's other cities.
And you also write a CNBC guide. Tell us what's special about the CNBC guide to Taipei.
So the CNBC guide is published by CNBC and Taiwan's Tourism Bureau, and this is more destination driven. So we cover a lot of like typical things to see around Taiwan, and also activities such as cycling and hiking.
And how is this different from the Louis Vuitton guide?
It's about the entire Taiwan, so it's not just Taipei, and it's marketed towards first-time visitors to Taiwan, whereas the Louis Vuitton guide, the audience is a mix of foreign tourists and also people who have lived here for a long time, like long-time Taipei residents.
Are these guides only published in English, or are they published in multiple languages?
The Louis Vuitton guide is published in English and French, and the CNBC guide will be published in English and some other European languages.
Yeah, and you're going to review the translations of all those languages?
No, definitely not.
And when will the CNBC guide be published?
Around the same time, around mid-year this year.
Will there be big launch ceremonies for these guides? The red carpet and flashing lights kind of thing to launch these?
There usually is for the Louis Vuitton guide, but I'm not sure if they're going to be doing that this year because of COVID. So
you won't get to go to Paris for the launch?
Probably not.
Oh,
it's too bad.
Yeah, it's too bad. Who wouldn't want a trip to Paris? do people often say things to you like, "Whoa, wow, your life must be really tough"? You write about food and travel and craft beer, and they don't realize how hard you have to work to produce these kinds of materials.
Yes, that happens sometimes, and it's a little annoying.
What do you say to them?
Well, I don't usually say anything to people like that because haters are gonna hate.
You don't tell them like, "Why don't you try, writing? We'll see how you can do."
Yes, sometimes I do say that, especially when I was younger.
Well, what do you, in your experience, what do foreign visitors, travelers, people coming to Taiwan for tourism, what are they most curious about? What do they want to read about maybe before their trip to Taipei or to Taiwan?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. I think in earlier years, people were really curious about food in Taiwan, like night markets, stinky tofu, Gentian cha, that kind of stuff. But recently, people have become more interested in activities such as cycling and hiking, like I mentioned before. Taiwan has become known as a place to cycle, I guess.
And so you have to be an expert in all these things in order to be able to write about them? I'm talking about the outdoor activities.
To a certain extent, yes. But I do enjoy doing outdoor activities myself, so it's, yeah.
Well, which ones in Taiwan do you typically recommend, though, for first-time visitors?
For cycling, there's a really nice cycle path in Taidong. Well, there's several, and they cut through rice terraces, and it's just very pretty, and you can hear birds in the background. And for hiking, I prefer waterfall hikes because if I'm going to get sweaty and gross, I would like to jump into a waterfall at the end of it. And there's a really nice waterfall hike just behind Cavalan Distillery. Which is really nice. It's called Jiuliaoxi.
And you also, speaking of water, you also sometimes write about Taiwan's beaches as well. We mentioned staycations earlier. What are some of the easy beaches to get to from Taipei in your experience?
From Taipei, there's the North Coast. There's Qianshui one, which is just north of Damshui. And it's also easy to get to Yilan. You can take the bus from Taipei City Hall to Jiaoxi, and then Jiaoxi, take a taxi or a train to Waiao.
And you've, of course, you've seen a lot of the beach resorts around Asia as well. How does Taipei, or Taiwan, I should say, how does Taiwan compare? Let's be frank.
Beach resorts. I don't think Taiwan has many beach resorts. It's more like minsus and hostels. Yeah,
well, what's holding Taiwan back in that regard, in your view?
Well, there still isn't that much of a beach culture here. Even though this is slowly changing, I feel like a lot of people still don't like getting tan, or they might be afraid of the water. So
it's an island. What do you mean people are afraid of the water?
Yeah, I know. I find it very bizarre.
And you also surf as well.
Yes.
And do you recommend Taiwan as a surfing destination when you're writing about Asia's surf scene?
Yes, I would recommend Taiwan because there are not that many surfers here. So, I mean, compare it to places like Hawaii or Bali. There are really not that many people in the water.
And is it accessible, though, for foreign visitors? I mean, is it easy to find the beaches and carry your surfboard around on transportation?
Well, it's easy to find the beaches because I write about them, and
so just look up just look up Dana's website.
Yes.
And you can find where to go for surfing.
Yes, exactly. But getting to certain surf beaches requires quite a lot of planning and preparation sometimes.
Well, so that it's good if people who are listening to the show and they're thinking about coming to Taiwan for that. Now they can prepare because hopefully
Yes.
travel will resume. When travel does resume, Dana, as an expert traveler and travel writer, where are you going to go first?
Well, so now we're talking about what my dream vacation will be.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, well, I've always wanted to go to Greenland. It's something that I've been planning for a year, and I was supposed to go last spring, but that didn't happen.
Was that for a holiday, or were you going to go there for purposes of writing about it for a publication?
Oh, that was going to be for a holiday. Yeah, I've always wanted to go to Greenland, especially after watching The Secret Life of Walter Mitty.
Okay.
And it seemed like an adventure.
Maybe one day there'll be a Secret Life of Dana Tur, and people want to come to Taiwan after watching that.
Maybe.
Where else besides Greenland is going to be on your top list of destinations once travel resumes?
I still have never been to South America, so I would really love to go there, to Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia. So.
Well, that's going to be a
Yes.
long trip from here in Asia. How do you even get there?
Yeah, so I've been looking that up before COVID happened, and I was going to fly from Singapore to South America, and that would have been like more than 48 hours. So yeah, so that means I would have to probably stop in California for a few days and then continue my journey.
Speaking of this kind of travel and lengthy trips, give us some tips about being in airports. You have favorite airports around Asia, or favorite things to do in an airport when you're either just passing through or when you have a layover or transit?
Oh wow, I haven't traveled in more than a year because I've been stranded in Taiwan for almost 13 months now, so I have to try to remember what it's like to be in an airport. Well, I really like using the airport lounges because it's just a nice way to unwind and relax and eat free food. But don't eat too much though, because I've gotten sick a few times from doing that.
So those lounges are not as luxurious as they might seem.
Yeah, they look nice, but they might give you food poisoning.
Which would not be very enjoyable when you get on the plane, huh?
No.
What about airlines? What makes for a good airline in your experience? What's the little things that an airline might do well that gets you to travel on that airline again?
Well, my favorite airlines are Singapore Airlines and EVA. The service is always really good. For instance, once I was flying Singapore Airlines from Singapore to London, and I couldn't sleep, so I was just drawing in my sketchbook, and this air steward came up to me and he asked me if I was a professional artist. I was like, no, and then he told me that my drawing was really nice, and a few minutes later he came back and he had made like an origami duck for me, and he said that even though he can't draw, he can make this, and yeah, I just thought it was like really friendly.
It sounds like something out of like a TV commercial for an airline where
exactly.
the staff do these little things to make the passengers happy.
Yes, it was actually exactly like that, and they just made the 14-hour flight happier, and I guess.
Tell us another kind of unusual or funny story, something you encountered when you were visiting a restaurant or some other tourist destination to write about it.
Oh, okay. Well, once back in 2017, I was invited by this luxury apartment in Bangkok, and they wanted to fly me on Thai Airways business class from Taipei to Bangkok to cover the opening of this new luxury condominium.
But you're not a real estate writer. You don't write about this.
Yeah, that's the thing. so that's why it was really weird. It was like a press trip, and there were other journalists from other parts of Asia who were also there, but every single one of them covered like homes. Like they wrote for like interior interior design magazines or home magazines, and I was the only one who didn't. So I kind of felt like Hugh Grant from that movie Notting Hill, where he's trying to meet Julia Roberts, and he said that he's from Horse and Hound magazine.
Mm-hmm.
So the entire trip, I kind of felt like that. It's
So
like,
you walked around saying you're from Horse and Hound.
No, but that would have lightened up the mood. It was pretty stuffy.
Did they realize that they had selected kind of the wrong journalist for the trip?
I'm not sure, because there are not many journalists who write in English about Taiwan. So I think they kind of just found me online. They're like, oh, she'll do, like she'll make it work, which I did. So. Did
you write something about it afterwards?
Yes, that was my one and only article about a house.
And where did you get it published?
Oh, I can't remember. I think it was either for Hong Kong Airlines or EVA. I managed to convince my editor that this is a really awesome luxury condominium their readers should invest in.
you mentioned some of the in-flight magazines that you write for, and you used to write for the Taipei Times. You're doing the Louis Vuitton and Cnbc Asia guides to Taipei and Taiwan. Where else? What other publications can people find your work in?
Well, I also write for Marriott and eBookers, which is owned by Expedia.
And eBookers is for targeting what kind of readership?
Mostly tourists from the UK and Europe.
And where else could people find more of your articles or your photographs of your travel experiences?
They can check out my website, which is www.danawhiter.com.
And you also have an Instagram account that you'd like to share with us?
Yes, it's Dana Uliter.
Yeah, Dana Uliter, Y-U-L-I?
Yes, Y-U-L-I.
Okay, so if you want to learn more about traveling, not just in Taiwan, but around Asia, craft beer, outdoor activities in Taiwan, Dana Tur is the expert. And Dana, we're so happy that you were able to join us today. And although you said you've kind of been stranded in Taiwan, we're fortunate that you have been stranded here during COVID-19, because Taiwan's not such a bad place to be. Thank you again for coming on the show.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Residence Messenger on Taipei Broadcasting Station. I'm Ross Feingold, and have a great weekend.